Public opinion erupts on how public opinion can and should be shared in Jacksonville City Council. Council members had to stop and watch when police confronted protesters inside the chamber. What are the rules and what's worth changing as opponents took to the streets outside JSO? Plus, we've been following the turbulent time for Elon Musk in Washington. As he steps away, lawmakers wrestle to pass a new budget. Congressman John Rutherford explains his support for the president's priorities and describes the performance recently of Speaker Mike Johnson. And wasn't the Florida legislative session supposed to end last month with a new budget in place? What we can expect from the House and Senate as the clock ticks down in June on This Week in Jacksonville. So glad you're with us today. So this was a week in district for most members of Congress. That gave us a chance to catch up with U.S. Representative John Rutherford. The former Jacksonville sheriff is now in his fourth term in Congress, and he clearly supports what President Trump calls the big, beautiful bill. It's clearly big. I asked the congressman this week, what's the beautiful part?
Well, I think the beautiful part of it is it's good for the middle class and it's good for small business, because I think those are the two areas that have been hurt most over the last four years. And when you look at individuals, so we increased the standard deduction to $16,000, $32,000 for a couple. That's significant. Even more than that, think about this, Kent. If we don't pass this bill, the child tax credit will be cut in half. Right now, families with children are getting $2,000 per child in tax credit. If we don't pass it, that goes back to $1,000. If we do pass it, it doesn't stay at $2,000, it goes to $2,500. And so just in Northeast Florida, talking about that $16,000, if we don't pass it, a 21% increase in the standard deduction rate for people in Northeast Florida. 81,000 families will lose that child tax credit where it's cut in half. But here's the politics behind this thing though, Kent, and this is what people need to know and understand. The Congressional Budget Office, just like they did with the first Trump tax cuts, the Tax Cut Jobs Act, back in 17, 18, 19, that economy that we had going then was amazing. If you remember, we were hitting 3.5% GDP growth. I mean, it was amazing. And inflation was under 2%, remember? And unemployment was under 4%. It was amazing. But the problem was, I voted for that bill knowing that that was going to be the outcome. But the way the CBO scored that bill, they said it was going to be a $1.2 trillion deficit bill, that we were only going to have an average GDP growth of 1.9% for the next 10 years. And you know, I told folks back home and in D.C., you know, I was in law enforcement my whole life, but I know better than that, okay? You don't have to be an economist to understand if you give the middle class and small business more of their own money to keep and invest in their businesses, it's going to grow. They're going to spend, they're going to invest, they're going to save. And that's exactly what happened. Now look at this bill.
The CBO is saying that this is also not going to be as good as what you
this is project. Ridiculous. They're saying, Kent, only in Washington, D.C., you know, they've already scored the Trump extension, tax cut extensions. And they say that that's going to cost $4.5 trillion, right? So they're saying because we're not going to raise taxes $4.5 trillion, because we're not raising taxes, that's a cut. I'm like, no, that's not a cut. That's an extension. The same tax liability is going to go on after we pass this bill. Now, it'll change a little because of some of the promises that Trump made on, you know, we put $4,000 in there for the seniors on Social Security. They get a $4,000 additional deduction. No tax on tips, no tax on, you know, if you buy an American-made car, you don't pay interest on the loan. So there's those little things in there. But they're saying there's a $3.8 trillion spending in this bill when there's not. That $4.5 trillion is not a cut. We're extending it. And they did the exact same thing. And by the way, they're saying we're only going to grow at 1.8%. That's not even what we grew. That's not even what they said for the Tax Cut Jobs Act. So, and you know what 1 percentage point above that is worth? An extra, this year, it would be $280 billion a year more. Just for one additional percent.
You don't like the math that you're hearing from the CBO?
The CBO, I'm telling you, they are not nonpartisan.
Well, that's what I hear, is that they're
they
nonpartisan.
They are not nonpartisan. They are very partisan, I think. And they are part of the deep state. And they have, I think, falsified the information about what this bill's going to do and what the spending and cuts are. Look, we cut $1.69 trillion in this bill. We're about to pass another bill that's going to have the 9.4 billion in those cuts in it when we go back next week, I think. I hope it'll get to the floor that soon. But, so the way the CBO is couching this bill is...
Yeah, you disagree.
It's not right. It's just not right.
Well, you mentioned DOGE cuts, and I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, it sounds like that's coming to the House soon. What we know came this week was Elon Musk confirmed, yep, I'm departing. But kind of on the way out the door, he talked about the big, beautiful bill and said, I don't think that's going to help. That's going to set back the efforts of government efficiency. Yeah,
well, that's only if you believe what the CBO is saying. And I happen to disagree completely with what the CBO is saying, and so do most of my colleagues, obviously, in the Republican conference. It is not, believe me, we're going to have growth well above 1.8% GDP growth in this country. We saw it the first time, you're going to see it the second time.
You heard Mr. Rutherford criticize the Congressional Budget Office. Officially, the agency says it conducts objective, impartial analysis and hires employees, it says, solely on the basis of professional competence without regard to political affiliation. On the topic of Speaker Mike Johnson, Mr. Rutherford says Johnson's done a fantastic job in what is clearly a very difficult role. All right, when we come back, Chris Hand joins us. We're diving into the local, state, and federal topics that are top of mind right now. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And right now, we're going to dive into all things political with Chris Hand, part of our Hand on Government segment we do once a month. Chris is a government law attorney who served at the local, state, and federal level, including as a staffer for Senator Bob Graham. Chris joining us by Zoom today. Chris, I wanted to start, we just heard, interviewed Representative John Rutherford. He's a Republican. He is a fan of this big, beautiful bill that President Trump has been urging the House to get through. So it's passed in the House. Now it goes to the Senate. What's your view, and what are some of the things that really could impact people as this bill goes through and maybe becomes law?
Well, Ken, as you say, it has passed the House, but now faces potentially an even more difficult step in getting through the United States Senate. As you know, right now, the Republicans have a majority of 53 senators to 47 senators in the United States Senate. That means they can lose exactly 3 Republican senators. They do have the vote of Vice President J.D. Vance to break any 50-50 tie in the Senate. And right now there's a lot of controversy in the Senate about this bill, and you've got it on a couple of different sides. You have some conservative senators who are arguing that some of the cuts the House made aren't enough, that there need to be even deeper spending cuts in this legislation, and that they won't vote for the bill right now as it's currently situated. That includes senators like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, Rand Paul from Kentucky. You also have moderate senators like Susan Collins from Maine or Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who have expressed concern about some of the Medicaid cuts that are in this bill, how that could take people off health insurance, some of the food aid cuts as well. So Senate Majority Leader John Thune from South Dakota, who's just been in the job now since January, really has his work cut out for him, Ken, to find the 50 votes. And again, they've got the tiebreaker from Vice President Vance if they need it, to find the 50 votes to pass this legislation. Now, Ken, as you know, normally in the Senate, you require 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. In this case, it's only a simple majority because of what's called reconciliation. A limited number of times each year, the Senate can pass a bill, usually relating to fiscal or tax matters, with a simple majority. This particular legislation falls under that definition, and as a result, just requires a majority vote in the Senate.
And Chris, just make sure all of us know on the process side. So the House passed this, it goes to the Senate. The Senate, can they make some changes? Can there be amendments? Can they alter how the bill is structured in order to get those 51 votes or more that they need?
Most definitely, Ken. It's virtually certain that whatever product comes out of the Senate, if any product does, because again, right now it's very close in terms of the number of votes they need, but if any product comes out of the Senate, it is not going to be the same as what passed from the House. As a result, the two houses of Congress will have to go into what's called conference committee to try and resolve any differences between the House and the Senate and send the bill back to each respective chamber for final approval. As you know, that is a very difficult process. This passed the House on a very narrow margin. It will pass the Senate on a very narrow margin. So whatever compromise bill goes back to each House will face a similarly precarious legislative journey. So we're a long way from the finish line. Not only has to pass this first hurdle in the Senate, but then also pass through a conference committee and final votes in each houses of Congress. A lot more miles to go before the journey of the big, beautiful bill is finished.
Chris, I want to transition from that federal note to something local and here in Jacksonville. This past Tuesday night, City Council meeting, and then they had to take a break. They stopped down because there was a disturbance, and the details of which have come out that people were essentially trying to protest or have their voices heard at a time when the council meeting is not taking public comment. You're seeing some video here that was recorded of 3 arrests that were made. This is at the back of the city council chambers here. What are your thoughts here? Because in the aftermath of that, we heard people saying, hey, we deserve a chance to speak. The city council is saying, but that's not the right time or the right way to have your voices heard. What's your view?
Okay, we talk a lot about citizenship and the importance of people expressing their views on subjects, but we often use the phrase effective citizenship, and that means obviously people going about their citizenship in the way that's most likely to have those views expressed in a constructive and ultimately productive way. In this case, the city council does have very clear rules, has had those rules in place for a long time, that prevent any disruptions during the council members, whether that's cheering or yelling or loud clapping. In the determination of the council leadership, these protesters violated those rules. They were asked to stop. They did not stop. They were then escorted out by the police. In the process of being escorted out, either resisted arrest nonviolently, or in the case of one of the protesters, appeared to sort of put his hand on a Jacksonville sheriff's officer deputy, which is, of course, strictly not allowed. And so these arrests followed. And also, as WJXT and other outlets have reported, one of the individuals arrested had a knife, a pocket knife with him as well. And of course, that is prohibited under state law to bring a weapon into a public meeting of that kind. So again, there were a number of violations of the council rules and apparently state law. 3 individuals who were arrested, and their fates will now be determined by the state attorney's office and the court system.
Yeah, it's absolutely right for citizens to be able to voice their concerns or opposition to something that's happening. But do you feel like the process needs to be followed, or do we need to change the process somehow so people are heard?
Well, Ken, as you know, there is a process right now at council meetings called public comment. And there's usually a couple of general public comment processes where citizens can comment up to 3 minutes on any issue they'd like to talk about. There are also individual periods of public comment for a number of bills, usually on what's called their second reading. Means they're going to be up at the council meeting for final debate and decision 2 weeks later. So there are a number of opportunities for public comment. We also all have the opportunity to reach out to our district council members, the person who represents our particular neighborhood, and the 5 at-large council members. So there are a number of points of access to city council members throughout the process, and I think citizens should use all of those. But it's important to use them in a constructive and respectful way and respect the council rules. In this case, because of some what was apparently prolonged clapping and cheering that was going on, the council president decided that those rules were not being followed. He asked the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office he asked the protesters to follow the rules. They did not. He asked the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office to remove them. Because of the resistance during that removal process, several were arrested. So, Ken, as we talk about a lot, effective citizenship is important. Citizens should absolutely have their say, but it's also very important to follow those rules and, of course, follow the direction of law enforcement officers when they're enforcing those rules.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your perspective, and stay with us. We invite you to stay with us, too. So we're going to transition to state news. Someone suggested Florida state lawmakers are pulling a page from Florida State University students and procrastinating. Will the House and Senate pull the equivalent of a legislative session all-nighter, the paper they have to write, and the for real deadline to turn it in? That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Isn't it good to have dependable people in your life? Chris Hand has been traveling, but he joins us this morning even via Zoom. Chris, thank you for that. Now, I want to lean into your experience in state and local government, state lawmakers. Why are you waiting? The Florida legislative session finished last month, but didn't really finish because their their mandate legislatively is to have a budget. We still don't have it. What's going on here, Chris?
Well, Ken, I was talking about this earlier this week, and the phrase came up, which, was the first in the movie Ocean's 11 and became a meme. You had one job. Well, the one job the legislature has under the Florida Constitution is to pass a budget this year. As you know, the annual legislative session ran from the first week in March to the first week in May. And yet here we are now in the month of June, and there still is no budget. And we're under a very tight deadline because, Kent, the current fiscal year ends on June the 30th. If there is not a budget passed and signed into law by that time, something will happen for the first time in recent Florida history. We'll have a government shutdown, which has not happened here again in recent Florida history. So again, right now, we're not clear exactly where those negotiations stand. At the end of session, the House and the Senate were about just under $5 billion apart. The House had a budget of about $113 billion. The Senate just over $117 billion. There was some debates over tax cuts and what kind they might take. But as of right now, Kent, the House is scheduled to be there right now, and the Senate are kind of scheduled to kind of get back together. We just don't have a clear idea on where those budget negotiations stand, and the clock is ticking.
And Chris, one of the big things that came out of legislative session that we're still waiting to see resolved, proposed state tax cuts and how they impact local communities, right? The governor pushed to eliminate property taxes. Other legislators said no, it was sales tax, but either of those are going to have impacts on local governments, right?
Well, that's exactly right, Ken. Remember, there's 3 parties involved in the legislative session. It's not just the Florida Senate and the Florida House of Representatives, but also the governor, because he not only proposes a budget, but also wields a veto he can use in this process. What the governor has been pushing for is some sort of either sharp reduction or even elimination of property taxes in the state. Now, that would require a constitutional amendment that would have to go on the ballot, but it's also something that would have a massive impact on local governments, city and county governments, and school districts around the state, which largely fund their operations through what are called ad valorem or property taxes. Just to put this in some perspective, Kent, of the city of Jacksonville's $1.8 billion budget, just over $1 billion of that, $1.03 billion, is funded by property taxes. So you make that sort of elimination, and if you don't make up the revenue through other means, you're going to very much affect core services like police, fire and rescue, public works, parks, solid waste removal, all those core services which people rely on for local government to handle. And this is something that would disproportionately affect the city of Jacksonville and significantly affect other cities and counties, and especially school districts around the state. So that's very controversial. On the other hand, you have the State House of Representatives, which has largely rejected the governor's call for property tax cuts and says that it instead wants to implement sales tax reduction. Right now, even though we have a variety of kind of local option sales taxes, the base sales tax rate in Florida is 6%. State's House Speaker Danny Perez wants to lower that to 5.25%. The governor, so he's on record as supporting a sales tax cut. The governor wants a property tax cut or elimination. And the state Senate President, Ben Albritton, has been trying to somewhat mediate between these two views. But that is part of what's bogging down the budget process, this very sharp disagreement, particularly between the governor and the State House Speaker on the issue of tax cuts.
Yeah, and we only have about 30 seconds for your response, Chris, but City of Jacksonville, they're working on a budget too. A lot of important figures and things that they have to lean into here because the financial picture is changing in the City of Jacksonville.
Well, that's right. The City of Jacksonville faces potentially huge deficits over the next several years, according to projections from the Council Auditor's Office. Makes it even more important. We talked about effective citizenship earlier, Kent. Now is the time for citizens to engage with their council members in the mayor's office to make it very clear what they think the priorities should be in the City of Jacksonville budget, because this is going to be a very different budget year with some of the deficits involved in different years to come. More crucial than ever that citizens communicate with their elected officials and say what they want in their budget, because at the end of the day, Kent, it's a budget that belongs to the people of Jacksonville.
Yeah, and some important decisions to be made there. At least people in City Hall know this is coming, because I know you went through this process back in 2011, 12. It was some tough times there, tough decisions to make. Chris Hand, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Kent.
All right, so I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching On Air on Channel 4 and CW17. And then you'll always find us online, too. We stream on news4jax.com and on our streaming app, News4Jax Plus. Don't forget to check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition, too. This episode looks at the expansion of Money Pages, now in its 25th year in business.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.